This is my impression of you riding off to save them once again, caught in the clutches of the Saviour Complex, motivated to turn the world around and bring back the victims from the brink of self-destruction. But it doesn't work. You know it doesn't work, and in this video we're going to hopefully understand the deep psychological principles, and I mean genuinely deep psychological principles, of why you adopted this strategy in the first place, and how to actually release it from your own dysfunctional, compulsive patterns. I know what this feels like because my default leaning from savior to victim is definitely the savior complex. Some people have a victim complex, some people have a savior complex. Usually we swing one way or the other, and by the end of this video, you are going to step down from your noble steed, you're going to take off the white armor, and you'll hopefully learn how to be supportive and helpful for the people that you care about without being compulsively overgiving or otherwise being caught in some kind of unconscious trauma response which is just not suiting you anymore. So let's go into it. I'm going to bring today's question up on the screen. It's a wonderfully detailed question from Maisie. Very rarely do I read such a long question fully on a video, but it's really worth it today because there's some great self-reflection here, and I know Maisie personally, so I know some of her story, and it's fun. It's wonderful. I'll just read it from the screen. Hello. I'd love for you to speak into the unconscious psychological structure of the empathic white knight syndrome or rescuer complex, and more specifically, how to illuminate the deep roots of where this is presenting itself from. I've been aware of this part of me for a long time, and I've done much work to get to a point where it doesn't show up much anymore, and I'm holding a large degree of awareness to catch it quickly when it's present. Yet I have recently found myself feeling deeply rejected. I'm aware that this is a deep wound, with some specific occasions when my more intimate friends decline offers of support. The deep somatic sense of rejection is the clue that this is tethered to something at the core and not a rational response to what is in my present final sentence. I'd love some insight and actionables if possible. Of course, Maisie is someone who I've been in contact with for a few years. We've had some exchanges here and there, and I know that she does her own coaching work, so she's already well on the path of catching this complex. You can't listen to a question like that and think that this is a person who's completely caught up in unconscious survival trauma energy. There's a great degree of self-reflection, and you can probably relate to this degree of, okay, I know that I'm overgiving, I know that I'm rushing in, I know that I'm in the fix them kind of pattern, but it doesn't actually stop it from coming up. You might have pulled back from maybe giving way too much to your parents or showing up as a mom or a dad for your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You're out of the main patterns. Maybe you can relate to Maisie with this moment of still probably overextending with your friends or maybe with your romantic partners, and then having that feeling of overblown rejection, which you know isn't necessarily the most authentic response or the most grounded response to what could just be a polite rejection of, hey, look, I don't need your support right now. Can you please just let me figure this out yourself? Why do you keep getting involved? Why do you feel like you need to fix them? Why do you feel like you have to save so that you can be saved yourself? Let's dive right into it. Psychological overview of why the Saviour Complex even comes about in the first place. An interesting moment for me because I filmed a video on this in my Shadow Work Library course, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I filmed a variety of videos about the complex and victimization and all of these inner critic patterns. So this is fresh on my mind, and I'm going to try and condense it down and present it to you as psychologically completely as I can. The overall point that I want you to remember, if this is the only point you take from this video, is that most people, and I will go as far to say that almost every person based on my research and my private client work, will either swing by default towards savior or towards victim. If you grew up in a traumatic environment or you had some degree of discomfort, maybe there was arguing in the family, maybe mom had an addiction issue, maybe dad wasn't there too much, you had two options, roughly speaking. You could either try and fix things, or you could be defined by the things that were going wrong, and you could become part of that problem, part of the issue, part of the heaviness. Of course, it isn't that simple. You may swing towards savior or towards victim, but if you look at shadow psychology, you will pendulum back into the opposite polarity given enough time. This is a classic pattern, and very few people escape the overall tendency to go one way or another. So just to get that out there, you're not broken. It's not irreparably damaged at the center of your core. It's quite a normal thing. Imagine yourself being a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, and there's a moment where your parents are having an argument, and you've got two choices in that moment, which is either speak up and try and, no, calm down, everyone calm down, there's no need to fight. Imagine yourself being a little boy or a little girl, there's no need to fight, don't, stop shouting, everyone stop shouting. Beginning of the Saviour Complex. If you look towards the victim complex, maybe you start crying and you make it about yourself. You try and draw the attention away and you say, you start crying, you start weeping, and maybe they stop arguing. And sometimes it works. That's where it begins. The victimization complex, or the self-victimization complex, is when you draw the attention into yourself. You have that kind of dysfunctional narcissistic energy where you really go into the heaviness of the emotion. And usually, strategically, from a shadow perspective, it fixes the situation because the parents literally stop arguing, or maybe the sibling stops bullying you. If you start crying, they stop hitting, or alternatively, you become the savior and you find a way to fix it, find a way to make it perfect, find a way to become the little therapist for mom or dad, or maybe be sat there on the couch while you're listening to them talking about how they're going to get a divorce, or maybe they're going through a divorce. There's all kinds of common situations where children end up siding with mom or dad. We'll focus on the Saviour Complex for now, but the basic principle is that you had a survival strategy, a way of keeping yourself safe in an unsafe environment, and that was the best possible set of options for the little boy or little girl that you were. A complex, psychologically speaking, in a more formal sense, is a constellated series of sensations and experiences, conscious and unconscious, which become more of, I'll simplify the language, a constellated series of sensations and experiences. It's a variety of things which are happening throughout your time period of life. I'm just trying to simplify this. It's because I'm coming out of the course consciousness where we're bringing out the books and simplify the complex. A complex is a situation where a variety of moments come together to create a solid thing in your psyche. That solid thing is usually a persona or a game that you're playing or a default strategy which triggers and then becomes possessive. You get caught in the complex based on a certain outer condition. For Maisie today, in her question, she was talking about how the Saviour Complex is coming up when her friends are in trouble. And I imagine for her personally, maybe not for her personally, but maybe for most people watching this video, if you notice that the complex is triggered in a certain moment with a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, someone at work, someone that you're employing, if you step into that moment because they were in pain, that's the first awareness. Something bad happened in the environment, okay? Maybe the complex gets triggered, all of that, condensed survival energy gets activated all of a sudden because someone starts crying or someone starts shouting, and you think it's about them. But it's never about them. It is never about their actual emotions, and this is where it gets deep and raw, and it might be somewhat confronting for your identity around being a good person. Let's briefly touch upon that for a moment. If you really want to get behind the Saviour Complex, you have to be willing to drop your identification with being a good person, being an angel with a halo on your head, being the friend who's always there to listen. You're leaning in and going, yes, Or maybe you're a man and with your girlfriend, you're showing up, you're providing all the finances. Anytime she possibly has any kind of issue, you're dropping everything from your day and you're listening to her. You're doing everything you possibly can to provide and take care of her because that's what a man is supposed to do. And there's something beautiful about that. There's something genuine and very inspiring about that energy when done consciously. But if you're going to that because you see them being in a massive problem, and actually, if you pause and step back from a detached perspective, your girlfriend just came up to you and she expressed that she was a bit frustrated with what someone said at work, and you drop your entire workday to then look after her and go into a 3-hour conversation. Was it really their problem that you were responding to, or was it your own discomfort? That's the key perceptual unlock. Anyone who's caught in the Saviour Complex, to the best of my awareness, based on research, based on working with clients, and based on my own bloody difficult journey of unraveling this, it's never about them, it's about your emotions in response to them. You make others feel better, or you try and make others feel better to make yourself feel better. You are uncomfortable with their anger, you're uncomfortable with their sadness. It's your relationship to rage and grief, your relationship to conflict, which is what you need to focus on. It's never about them. That's where it gets right at the center, because you have to challenge your identity of being a savior or being a martyr. You have to take off the white armor, and you also have to be willing to go, oh, I'm the one that I'm actually trying to save, because what I'm trying to make happen is I'm trying to reduce all the intensity in the environment, just like I used to do when I was a kid, and my parents were shouting or something else was happening. I'm triggered back into that old consciousness. I'm trying to make the world better. No, I'm not. I'm trying to make myself feel better, and I'm thinking or pretending that I'm trying to make the world better. There's a huge difference. It takes a bit of reflection, but the ultimate level up from unconscious savior complex to conscious helper energy is realizing when it's selfish versus selfless. If you're actually trying to improve the world and you're doing it from a sustainable, genuinely loving, genuinely powerful place, you won't have so much of an emotional charge within, which is exactly what Maisie caught in today's question when she was saying that the emotions were tethered to something more painful at the core. It wasn't a rational response. It's not rational to get really rejected and feel abandoned because your friend didn't want your support. That's separating out the selfishness from the selflessness. And if you want the ultimate invitation, having looked at the psychology of why the savior complex is coming about, again, we lean either towards savior or victim, and in a shadow moment, if savior isn't working, we might try out the victim strategy. Have you ever had this moment where your girlfriend or your boyfriend is crying, you try and do the fixing strategy, and then after a few hours you go, it's always like this and my life's really bad. You just shadow swung into the victim strategy because the savior strategy wasn't working to try and get you to emotional center. It was never about them. It was never about them. There's nuance, there's complexity. To some degree, it might be about them, but if you really look for that millisecond moment when you're getting triggered and you're having that complex-based unconscious response, that's in your control. What you can do is limited. Ultimately, this is where it gets into the second half of this video. It's a limited series of options. Although at the very beginning of this video, I was playing around with riding on the horse, and I said, you can solve this, you can fix this, and you can unplug yourself from the savior complex, blah, 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 blah. That's a bit of a white lie. White lie for a white knight syndrome. I don't think that you can. I don't think that you can get to the exact central point and never be at risk of going into the complex that was condensed for many years throughout your childhood and maybe a few significant relationships. If this is plus 100 savior, this is minus 100 victim, and you've been organized towards plus 80, your responsibility, your healing challenge is bringing yourself back to center, but don't aim for zero and don't aim for maintaining zero. Accept that you might be at like a plus 20, plus 30 kind of tendency, and then rather than staying in unconscious versions of that charge, it's your responsibility to elevate that towards a more aware series of actions. How can you do this? How can you go from unconscious rescuing to conscious rescuing? You have to swap out the word rescue to the word help or the word support. And in most cases, if you've ever had a therapist, if you're a therapist yourself, if you've ever worked with anyone who helps people, or you've ever professionally helped someone, you'll probably notice a tendency that anyone who's in a therapeutic position is usually someone who had the savior complex response in their childhood. And I know this personally. I remember moments of being the little therapist in family living rooms, and here I am now doing therapeutic work many years later. Am I still caught in the savior complex? Maybe I am, but I also accept that this is my default leaning in the same way that I accept I'm born into a male body and nothing I could possibly do would put me into a female body. I was born in this part of the world, nothing else could change where I am in the world. I was born into this particular race, I have this particular constitution to my body, and there are things I can do about muscular gain or various things with my hair or my beard, but the fundamental essence of my biological reality is fixed. And to some degree, not the full degree, the deep complexes of our own psyche do have a degree of real rooting, which is extremely difficult to shift. There's so many imprints that we had in those early years that they just don't change. What you really need to do is bring it back, lower down the intensity, and raise your awareness of how to make it better. And for someone like Maisie, returning back again because I know her personally, she's been doing her work because she's moved that pattern towards conscious coaching and doing a variety of other things which are bringing those wounds towards a point of being a womb or a gift which offers something new. And I truly recommend this. If you're caught in the Saviour Complex, you're likely to enjoy work where you're helping people. And it's a bit twisted when you pause and think about it, because you're like, well, why do I personally, I'm going to think about this. Why do I personally, as Jordan Thornton, enjoy making these videos every single week, putting my time out there on the internet, doing all this work for free? Why have I enjoyed doing this? Sure, it makes sense that I'm doing it for the paid work. And okay, if I'm doing the paid work, it's because I'm getting money, and money is a capitalistic service and is an exchange. That makes sense from a business perspective. That makes sense from a variety of perspectives of that's the human adult world. But why do I enjoy this so much that I will happily make videos with my free time and there's nothing else I'd rather do? Why do I enjoy this so much? A variety of reasons, but one of the major reasons is I like being helpful. Why do I like being helpful? It's because I had to be helpful when I was a little boy. It's kind of dark, it's almost sad, but I'm self-aware enough to accept that. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not pretending that I can run away from my conditioning. It just seemed like my responsibility to take the reality that I was given, again, the biological reality that I have right now, the psychological reality, which is invisible but nonetheless present, and elevate it. If you're interested in therapeutic work, go down that path, but also watch out for those moments where you're unconsciously helping to an inappropriate degree. If you're going out on the street and recommending the latest inner workbook that you've been reading to the person at the checkout, or maybe you're going to your friend who loves partying on the weekend and recommending some high-level transpersonal psychology, you're probably caught in the Saviour Complex because, again, it's not about them. You're not even seeing them. You're just trying to project your own identity of being a helpful person to someone who is not the right match. Those are all the issues when it comes to therapeutic overgiving. There's a lot of transference issues there. They're very specific problems to pay attention to, even if you don't want to become a therapist, but you still want to lower down that Saviour Complex kind of pattern. You can watch out for moments. This is a real high-level take. This is, if you're still around at this point in the video, I'm glad that you're here. And here's one of the high-level takes to actually significantly shift your everyday experience of falling into this pattern. You have to watch out for victims. You have to watch out for the moments where your bipolarity, by contrast, attracting or spending time with people who are in the equivalent victim consciousness. The most toxic of toxic relationships, 100% savior energy, 100% victim energy. You kind of bounce like this against each other, and then occasionally you swap, and then you come back like this. Conflict, occasionally swap, come back to the extreme polarity. As you both start to heal, let's imagine you're even in a relationship, your victim-based partner, and you're in the Saviour Complex, you're gradually going to come into the center, but just make sure that you're attracting and being in relationship with someone who's also doing their own work, very conscious of those patterns, and they're not willing to take advantage of you. But you're also not trying to take advantage of them. For the Saviour Complex to continue, you have to have victims who you can rescue. If you're feeding your own dysfunction, if you're getting this dirty hook of rescuing energy because you're looking for victims in the world, and it's an unconscious, dysfunctional obsession, you're the one who really needs to take responsibility. It's not the victim's fault, because no one's really a complete victim. It's a survival strategy. Again, we're focused on Saviour Complex, but if we looked at the victimization, that's a different strategy, and I'd make a whole different video about how to overcome self-victimization. In fact, I think I've made a few on this channel already. Just watch out for victims, and don't be so obsessively focused towards them. And if you want a bit of a shadow work journal exercise right here, you have to ask yourself the shadow magnetism question of, what do I find so attractive about victims? Why do I find victims so irresistibly adorable? Why do I need to get so close to them and just eat up all their problems and take that on as my own baggage, my own burden, and my own great mission? Why? Why specifically? Take the time to answer that question, and you will get insights that I can't provide in a generalized video on the internet. You can shift the Saviour Complex. You're going to have to look towards the opposite end of the spectrum. You're going to have to raise yourself up in terms of the levels of consciousness that you bring forwards within the certain level of dysfunction itself. Don't expect to get towards perfection. Don't expect to undo all of your conditioning. You embrace it and you elevate it. I think that's the most practical advice I could give. Anything that would be more idealistic or more fantasy, or in my opinion, fantasy driven, to imagine that you can get to perfect centering and never do that, you're not looking close enough. because I can guarantee that someone who says that they've healed their Saviour complex and they don't go around rescuing people anymore, they'll still do it in small ways, but they'll try and bypass their own self-awareness, because it just doesn't. It just doesn't. You can disagree with me, and I'd love disagreement. But over the years of working with people and very, very deep introspection on my own path, maybe I'm just projecting my own limitations, in which case, if you can fully heal this, that's fantastic. But I have tried myself. I have seen people try very deeply. I've read the literature on this. I don't think that you can change it in the same way that your conditioning in the mother complex or the father complex is related to your biological reality with your actual mother and your actual father. You cannot change that history. They will always be the same mom, even if you change the stories, you look from different perspectives. There were literal facts of your childhood that cannot be changed, and your response to those conditions also cannot be changed. But you get the empowerment to be able to move here and there, and I'm trying not to discourage you at the very end of this video. I hope it has been useful. Just remember that it's a survival strategy. It doesn't need to be continued forever, but do also, I strongly, strongly recommend sit with the question of why you want to be so darn helpful, why you're so irresistibly magnetized towards victims, and what it would be like if you stopped trying to fix the world as a bypassing attempt to fix yourself. Hope you've enjoyed the video. I'll hear from you down in the comments, and here's the next video where we're going to be covering more psychological topics with even more depth and even more complexity. I'll see you over there.